The idea is to change the perceptions, to change the calculus. We're approaching the kind of conditions that unfortunately led to larger wars in the past. Ukraine needs the United States to reorient itself in geopolitics. What these developments underscore is that Russia's war against Ukraine has been not just a small regional war, but a much broader international conflict from the get-go. We have seen the way that Russia aligned its forces, counting on economic support from India and China, on military support with Shahed drones and ballistic missile technology from Iran, with troops and artillery ammunition from North Korea. So we have already seen a lot of aspects to this. Wars, particularly involving great powers, rarely are contained on a regional scale. And those strikes are another indication of that. One hopes that policymakers in Washington actually learn some lessons from this and put more pressure on Russia. Interestingly enough, this happens when the US Senate passing the new sanctions bill against Russia, which contains very strong provisions against countries that assist Russia in its war effort, that help it to build up its war chest. And so the fact that these conflicts are intertwined has to be taken into account. In terms of operations and in terms of specific strikes that you mentioned by Iran, well, we have heard that Ukraine's foreign minister has been in conversation with Iranians, that this was not an intentional attack necessarily, that Iran considered retaliation but decided not to retaliate. And in any case, if you consider that Russia has been launching half a dozen to a dozen ballistic missiles, hundreds of drones at Ukraine every day for the last several years, the fact that Iran can somehow increase the damage and the risk that Ukraine already experiences, I don't think it's going to change the calculus in Kyiv on how to deal. But I think if Ukraine can demonstrate to Iran, Russia, the United States that it has that capability, again, the idea is to change the perceptions, to change the calculus, to hopefully eventually induce Moscow to backtrack in this war, because that's the only way for that to stop. For Ukraine, it's very important to show its geopolitical capabilities and have the United States on board to put more pressure on Russia globally. Ukraine needs the United States to reorient itself in geopolitics. Donald Trump made a few moves earlier on when he wanted to put pressure on Russia as well as Ukraine earlier in his term, which included, for example, the repositioning of US nuclear submarines, in a way basically calling Russia's nuclear bluff. And if you look at this war, from both wars in fact, Iran and Ukraine, from Moscow's perspective, having studied Putin's politics for many years, my sense of it is that they think of it as a big geopolitical game with vulnerabilities, and so they read the intent in Washington. How brave are politicians in Washington to actually take on Russia? And so if they see significant moves at the global level, for example, interdicting the shadow Russian tankers exporting oil, the way that we did this with Venezuela, things of that nature, repositioning naval capabilities, that to me, will be probably one of the biggest factor if both of these conflicts somehow are moved toward a more peaceful resolution and speedier resolution. So that's what Ukraine needs. In some ways, the widening of this actually may help change that kind of mentality. Ukraine has been gaining some successes lately, but Russia still has a much larger population, much larger economy. Its army is still very capable with estimated 700,000 servicemen. There are reports that 30,000 more troops from North Korea may join the battles on the Russian side. And so, and Ukraine has a hard time defending against ballistic missile attacks, one of which recently hit an American company producing highly sophisticated drones that enable Ukraine to attack Russians. So for Ukraine, it's very important to have the United States on its side. Ukraine needs to show Trump that it has the cards. This is one of the cards that it can help us, the United States, prevail in achieving objectives in Iran with having its nuclear program suppressed and ensuring security in the Strait of Hormuz and security of US allies in the Gulf region. And so, you know, that's when it becomes part of a bigger game. One lesson from the history and research in international relations is that global wars, larger wars, are more likely under two conditions. When power in the system deconcentrates, that is, when the leading world power, such as the United States today, has fewer capabilities relative to others. And the second one is polarization. If it's not just multipolarity, but if it's also more polarized environment, when you see alliances such as, you know, the Axis versus the alliance in World War II, and the Entente versus the Triple Alliance before that, and the coalitions against Napoleon before that. And so what these conflicts do, what those strikes, they may be seen as individual events, but they gradually increase that polarization. And the North Korean support for Russia, it solidifies the kind of axis, say Russia, Iran, China interests that may play out in different ways and in unexpected ways in other different parts of the world. In relation to Taiwan, in relation to South China Sea, and things like that. So you can have various aspects here, and that is why obviously these developments are of concern. The pressure signals moves in the right direction, but it's not yet there. It's not yet enough. A lot more has to be done. Both in terms of supporting Ukraine with greater capabilities and in terms of repositioning globally against Russia. It's very important not just to think only about, say, specifics and tactics and repercussions of one specific event here, but to take a slightly longer and broader global view of the international environment as a whole. Because if we're moving into the kind of environment where, you know, might is right, military power, conflict is normalized, you know, polarized alliances, everybody retaliates, nobody takes a step back, then we're approaching the kind of conditions that unfortunately led to larger wars in the past.